Hello, and welcome to Tales of Dread, where we have more stories about the Dogman. So have fun, but don't forget to hit that like button. My name is Edward, and I've never thought that there are things like dogs, people, or what some people call werewolves. But on the night of August 23, 2008, I changed my mind. I'll never forget it. My wife and I were driving back to her cabin when this happened. This is in the woods in the north. This summer, after going to see friends in town, it was very hot and muggy, but because it was getting late, it was cooling down quickly and getting foggy. About a half-mile down the road, there were spruce trees and a bog. At the top of a hill, there was a farm field on the right. On the left are more hardwoods. At the time, I was in my mid-50s and didn't think things like what we were about to see were possible. Get out of the mist? Something came from the farm fields, from right to left. It was probably between 8 and 10 feet tall. The best way to explain what we saw is by saying, it looked like a mix of a person and a wolf. It looked like a werewolf. This thing or person had hair standing up and fur all over it. It then leapt into the air and landed on its feet right in front of my wife's van. No further than 20 feet. The strangest thing is that it moved and glided when it landed. It moved so smoothly and quietly that it seemed like the perfect hunter. Its arms were straight out in front of it. I've never seen a dog look or act like this in my whole life, and we were moving very slowly because of the fog. But when we both saw it, we stopped the van and looked at each other as if to say, did we just see that? We had? It still gives us the creeps. We both thought it was out of this world, which was another strange thing. It didn't move like I said it would. When it moved, it did so in such a smooth, fluid way. It was kind of smooth. But that's how we felt, and my wife has never been able to talk about what happened or what we saw. We were afraid to tell many people about what we saw afterward. We don't want to be called stupid. But I did tell a good friend who didn't laugh. He said that when he was little, his dad was a logger and would always tell him about seeing a dog, man. I'm so happy to have found your channel. I can see that other people also have animals like this one. Some of these people must find it hard to talk about what they saw and try to explain it to other people. I hope this helps people in Michigan. A lot of people have seen dog men. I'm a believer. You don't have to convince me, but I wanted to tell you about a sighting that happened in 2015. A man and his girlfriend were driving down the street. It was late at night and she had just gotten home from work. When she looks to her left, she sees something run from behind one house to behind the other. What was strange was that the thing ran across the road in a way that made both the guy and the girl think it was a cougar at first. But its height and size, not its color or how it moved, caught their attention. Once they saw that, they knew for sure that it wasn't a cougar because they could see how fast and big it was from where they were. Didn't move like a cat or any other animal would. They were both pretty scared by this. So they decided to go get something to eat and maybe talk about it. After that, they hoped things would calm down. And as they drive away, they see it just standing there under a street lamp and staring at them as they drive slowly by. He said that the thing he saw that night was very dark and had the head of a wolf on a man's body. The girlfriend said the same thing about it. Since almost 6 months ago, I was camping in the woods with 3 other friends. At the time, we were all about 20. This, too, happened in Ohio. We built a small lean-to and would go there on the weekends. All of the places were about 30 minutes from where we live. We knew about it because that was where we went hunting when we were younger. I think it might have been November, the last weekend of October. one of my friends wanted to go back and get some wood to make a fire. He got his .22 caliber rifle and went out on his own at noon. 2 or 3 hours later, he came back with a strange story while pacing near the creek that ran through the area. He looked up when he heard movement and saw what he thought was an old man in a grey overcoat. As the figure got closer, though, it became clear that it wasn't a man. It had long, grey hairs that covered its whole body. Its fingers were very long and ended in sharp claws. It had 2 large black eyes and the head of a wolf, with a very long snout and white teeth. It stood on 2 legs, like a person, not like a 4-legged animal. And when my friend saw this strange thing moving quietly through the brush, he didn't freak out. Instead, he shot at it and ran back to the lean-to, leaving his rifle behind. When he got back to camp, he thought it might have been a bear, but then he saw that it looked more like a wolf than anything else. I was surprised by his reaction when he told me about it. I mean, this guy never seems to be scared. He's been out in the woods a lot and doesn't really react to anything, so for him to be so upset and act the way he did, something out of the ordinary had to have happened to make him so upset. I mean, the guy was scared. After my son got off work at 10 p.m., we were on the way home. He worked pretty late, and he had just gotten his first job with a close family friend. He had just finished high school. He would have been lucky to get off at 10. So, I picked him up this evening and drove him home. Also, it was in the summer. Today was very hot, and just so you know, we live next to a big farm in northern Kentucky. So, we're now a few miles from the house and going down a small hill toward a crossroads. There is also a small gap in the trees that lets you see enough to know if cars are coming from either direction. This is also right before the actual intersection. At this point, I couldn't tell if anyone else was coming or going. So, when the light turned green, I started driving through the intersection. But something on the right side of us, almost right behind some trees that were blocking our view because it was dark outside, caught the attention of my sons. It looked like a humanoid figure, and at first I thought it was a person dressed in all black trying to get our attention. But something about the head and hair made me think it wasn't a person. I saw what looked like pointed ears, like a Doberman Pinscher, or at least that's what I thought of it as. And as we got closer, I realized that this wasn't a person because whatever it was took off running diagonally across the road in front of us so quickly that I couldn't see what was going on if I wasn't looking straight ahead. My son and I both gasped when we saw this thing, and my son kept asking his dad what it was. "Son, I don't know. It looked like something like a big, crooked tooth." I call it crooked because it sort of leaned over and bent itself in a way that made it look like it was deformed or that its spine was bent. It was incredibly fast, and the head looked like that of a dog, but the body was different. I live in Kentucky, where people say all kinds of things, and I've heard the term dog man before. People say it's the same as a werewolf, but I don't think this was one. It just looks like a really big dog to me. Was it possible that it was a dog man? Quite likely. So I've heard that there are a lot of reports out here in Kentucky and the whole South, even down to Mississippi. I guess when I saw that thing for the first time, I was so shocked that I wasn't sure what we were looking at, and it ran across the road so quickly that we didn't even have time to figure it out. My son and I don't even have time to think about it, let alone stop for it. I will say that it was pretty long and pretty dark, but it never looked over at her car. From what I could tell, it was just trying to get out of sight. Here's my story with the dog man. A friend of my stepdad owns some land in the town of Titusville, Louisiana. He hunts a lot on his land, and strange things have happened with animals there. One day, He was riding his four-wheeler to check on one of his deer stands when he came across a huge two-legged cannon that was as dark as the darkest night you could ever imagine. It looked like it had hair or fur all over it, and it was shorter than any dog he had ever seen. This thing was easily 4,546, but he also says it was very, very hunched over, but when it stood up, it was much taller. It growled and snarled at him before running into the thick woods, almost like it was upset to see him. The only thing that comes close to this creature is how old stories describe it as a huge, hairy werewolf or guru. But it's just an animal, at the end of the day. No one knows for sure what this was. Probably some weird animal, that much is for sure. Strange things like monsters, ghosts, and even giants have been seen in Louisiana. It is the center of voodoo, and it is one of the first places that come to mind when you think of something strange or scary. Some people say that the famous Honey Island swamp monster is really a Bigfoot and lives in the state. Some say it's a swamp monster, but others disagree. Creatures of the swamp aren't the only thing that makes this area strange. Everywhere you turn, there are haunted houses, old plantations, and cities with lost histories just waiting to be found. So you can't tell. I wouldn't be too surprised if a dog, a man, or a werewolf lived nearby. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I'm pretty sure I saw a werewolf. I was walking from school to my house. I live in Louisiana, where it's pretty hot and there are some deep woods where you could get lost if you weren't paying attention. So the kids did anything to stay inside, while my friends and I played outside all day. We liked how damp it was. I'm walking back from riding bikes with a few friends this one time. When I hear this sound in the distance, it sounds like someone is coughing, but it sounds different, and it makes me feel uneasy. I tried to ignore it at first until I got close enough to figure out what was making the noise. Then I started running. So, I guess some big thing had started coming after me, and even though I couldn't see it at first, I could feel it. So I started running as fast as I could. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but then I started running faster and faster, and the next thing I knew, I was jumping over a metal fence, and I could hear something running behind me. But when I turned to look, I was shocked by what I saw. No matter what this was, it was real. This was a real werewolf with long black fur that hung down. It looked very wild and untidy, and it was chasing me with great speed. Now, what's strange about this is that people don't believe me when I tell them the story. In fact, people make fun of me for it, but this is the only time I did what my gut told me to do. Looking back, I think this thing was after me, and it was already watching me through the trees. I could just feel something coming. And so I just started running. Except for this one time, I've never done or acted this way before. My body and I would never do something like this on our own. But things changed after I jumped over the metal fence, which was a big deal because I was a kid who wasn't very fit. I must have been afraid, then. I fell over the fence and landed on the other side. As I got back up, I saw something run right up to the fence, but instead of jumping over, it just stood there and gave me a look that said, "You should probably run." And it was kind of on the trail, nodded its head, and jumped to the side where the trees are. If you go a little further, the fence ends there. So, when I saw this, my first thought was that it was going to circle around and try to attack me from behind the trees. So I kept running farther and farther away. I threw my backpack down to move a little faster, and then I heard this thing again. It did exactly what I thought it would. I could hear it moving away from me and breaking through the thorns and bushes to my right. It was coming at me at a 90 degrees angle. I had to act quickly or I would soon be dog food. But my house was only a few blocks away. So I quickly pulled my textbook off my backpack, which I had just dropped on the ground, and got ready to throw it at this thing. But just as I did that, I lifted the book above my head and got ready to throw it at the thing to stop it. I mean, I was almost scared. What else should I have done? I had nothing else I could use to protect myself. It, or whatever it was, stopped moving and just sat there in the woods. I could hear it breathing very slowly and heavily. These raspy, long drawn-out breaths. I had to wait for it. It came for me. I was scared to death and thought I was going to be taken out at any moment. I didn't know what would happen. So I just stood there and didn't move for about 30 seconds. Then, when this thing stopped, I could no longer hear him breathing. I started to hear more movement to its right and left. At that moment, all I could figure out was that more of these things were coming up behind it and getting ready to jump me. And I think they started coming closer to me at that moment because I could see the trees start to move back and forth. As they got closer, I just threw the book down without caring. I ran, and when I got to the street that borders the forest and swamps, I could no longer hear him. I ran the last half block to my house as fast as I could, locked the door, and felt like I had just run a marathon. My mother was home and she was wondering what on earth was I running from. I told her that I saw a big dog that was going to eat me. She kind of laughed and looked worried at the same time, but tell me it's okay, honey. There are no big dogs that will hurt you. But I just ran up to my room and cried for a long time. After that day, I didn't blame the swamps as much. Not after school, especially. It was just too dangerous not to know that one of these things was nearby. As I got older, I realized that this was what they call a dog man, or what some people call a guru, or what you might call a werewolf. No matter how you look at it, this thing is a legend in real life. It has life. I know I saw it in person, and it's even meaner and nastier than you can imagine. I don't think I would have made it home that day if this thing had caught up to me. I'm just glad I got the better of it tonight. I was going to take a walk or run. I turned on my phone and turned Spotify up loud. As I walked under a street lamp, life was going well, but I started to notice something strange. Maybe the shadows behind and around me had started to move, but it's possible that they hadn't. So I was fine to go on. I usually make a 2-mile loop around my neighborhood. My neighborhood is tucked away in the state of Washington. Around here, there are a lot of thick woods, but I never go into them. I walked too close to a wooded area once, and I felt like I was about to be jumped. There was a homeless student there who almost broke my head open with a beer bottle. I think he was already pretty drunk, and he kept bothering me. It wasn't fun to run away from that. But on this night, there really wasn't any traffic, and an angry homeless man wasn't trying to kill me. It was pretty quiet, and all I could hear were crickets and the beautiful nightlife. But I couldn't hear much because I had my earbuds in and was blasting Spotify. So I kept walking and turned a corner. Up ahead, the road curved a little bit and then turned back onto a main road. Now, the neighborhood on the left side of the street continues down the street on the right. It does the same thing, but I'm looking through a thick forest and all I see are 2 small red lights that glow. I remember thinking, wow, those kind of look like glowing eyes. Most likely, isn't. So I keep walking, listening to my music pretty intently. When you're walking down the street and sometimes listening to music, do you ever feel like you're just walking through space? The strange lights are still there when I look up a few feet later, and now I'm wondering if someone set them up as a Halloween decoration. I mean, This is weird, but the closer I get to this shaper in the dark, the more I can see of its outline. Whatever they were from, these lights were between two street lights. So they were pretty well hidden in the dark. But I'm getting closer and closer to the other side of the street on the sidewalk. I'm looking over at it, and I can see that the lights are staying parallel and looking at me. I'm squinting my eyes to get closer to the light and see what I'm looking at. And I see these tall, pointy ears and that these lights are, in fact, eyes, and that it has a big, woolly body, and it all makes sense almost right away. Okay, this Halloween prop is very complicated, and that's awesome. And as I walked by it on the other side of the street, I kind of laughed because I thought, wow, someone still has this thing up, that's impressive. All of that goes out the window when it starts to move. It kind of just slowly backs away into the forest and disappears. When that happened, I almost did a double take and asked myself, what just happened? And at that moment, I had the weirdest feeling, like I should go back now that I'm no longer safe. It was the worst case of the creeps I've ever had, and because there was no one else around, I didn't feel as safe as I usually do when I'm out and about during the day. So if something happened, there would be other people around. This was around 11:30 at night. I work at a grocery store and get off pretty late. Before going to bed, I always like to go for a walk. It kind of makes me feel better. So this was just another Monday night, but whatever I saw scared me. I probably walked twice as fast back home, and I didn't go on another night walk until the next Thursday or Friday. Fear eats me alive every time I think about it, but you might not believe me, but I once saw a 7-foot-tall dog man cross the road right in front of my car. He was just walking across the road. I had just gotten in my car to go home from work and was checking my phone for text messages when I heard something move and looked up to see something step out into the road. First, I had a double ticket, and I was shocked to see this huge two-legged dog just step out, take about 34 quick steps, and disappear on the other side of the street. No, I didn't have time to take a picture, but I did have time to see how its eyes seemed to glow a warm, orange amber color when it looked at me. I wasn't scared as much as I was just shocked to see this thing. It didn't look at me, so I don't think it saw me. It looked like it really wanted to cross the road quickly so it wouldn't be seen. So, it was gone in about 3 or 4 steps, and the whole thing didn't last more than 5 seconds. It happened very quickly, and if I had my head down even more, I might not have even seen it. Before this happened to me, I didn't even know what a dog man was. Back in the fall of 2013, a few of my friends and I were having a party. One of my friends had to leave early because they had to be at work very early. We're talking like 4 a.m., and it's about 9 o'clock at night. At night. So we're all sitting around talking, and then they say goodbye and leave. Well, he's gone, but we're still sitting there chatting, and not even 30 seconds later, we hear the door slam and our friend walks in. We all turn around and are shocked when we see his face. He looks scared and panicked, and he is even hyperventilating. There's a crazy werewolf out here. We're all like, wait, what? We don't really believe him, either. And one of us says, Jonathan, what are you talking about? He comes in, slams the door, locks it, and starts to look out the window very quickly. I still think it's out there. I think I'm going to, but I'm not sure. Right now, we're all worried and standing up, saying, dude, calm down, what happened, what did you see? And when he turns around, he's so pale that I thought he was going to throw up. He tells us that as he was getting into his car, he saw a big dog stand up behind it and go behind some bushes. Travis, whose house we're at, gets worried right away, grabs his gun, and goes outside. He thinks that someone broke into Casey's house or that someone in a costume wanted to go to Casey's house or something. So he walks out onto the porch, yells, "Who's out here?" and shoots a round into the sky. Now that Jonathan is really scared, he is doing everything he can to get Travis back in the house. "Travis, it's out there, get back in now," but Travis won't listen. He goes outside to where Jonathan's car is and looks around to see if he can find any sign of anything. It's raining lightly and it's very quiet, but there's really no sign of anything out here. So he walks out to the end of the driveway and stops right there in the opening of the trees across the street. He sees a tall two-legged figure with glowing amber eyes and a big head that he said looked just like a German shepherd staring at him because it was close to the streetlight. He was able to see this thing pretty well. Travis is just standing there, not moving, and we can all see him through the window looking over the hedges at something. He stops, turns around, and Vanessa starts running back to the house. He flies into the house, closes the door, and locks it. His face was pale and stuttering, just like Jonathan's, and now my other friend and I are freaking out, but we might be thinking this is all a big joke. He looks at Jonathan and tells him, "Man, you need to stay the night. It's not safe for you to be out there." And Jonathan keeps asking, "What are we going to do?" So we wait around for a while, hoping that things will calm down. Travis and Jonathan just sit there, and Travis still has the rifle in his hand, which scares Jonathan. They even think about calling the police, but Travis says, "The cops are going to think we're crazy, man. Don't bother. Let's just wait it out and see what happens." After about 2 hours, Jonathan says, "I really need to go home and get some sleep." He opens the door, and it's so quiet outside that you could hear a pin drop from a mile away. Before, you could hear the crickets, which were pretty loud, and they seemed to take over the night. Jonathan runs to his car, jumps in, turns the key, and speeds out of the driveway. He stops, waves at us, gives us the thumbs up, and speeds away. Travis does nothing but stand there and look out the window. Well, he got out of here, that's for sure. Okay, gentlemen, tonight, it's time to hold the fort. Even after everything that's happened, my other friend and I are still pretty scared. Was it a joke? Did they really see something? The rest of the night was pretty strange. We finally fell asleep in his living room, probably around 1 a.m. Even though I swore I heard something tap on the window right where my head is in the middle of the night, I couldn't be sure. I kind of woke up, but I didn't dare open my eyes to look because I didn't want to admit that what happened was real. However, Travis and Jonathan might have really seen something after that night. We never again talked about it. In fact, I think by the next morning we were all ready for things to go back to normal. One night, my wife and I were cuddling on our trampoline in the backyard while watching the stars. We got lost in what we were saying to each other and in the beauty of the sky above us. When my wife suddenly says, "Honey, what is that?" and I kind of look up to where she's pointing, we both see big ears on the other side of our fence. "Honey, I don't know what that is," and we're both looking at what she's pointing at. Suddenly, a head pops up over the fence, and a face that looks like a grotesque dog looks at us. When my wife screams, it lowers its head again. We both get up and run through the sliding glass door into the house. "What was that?" my wife keeps asking. "What happened?" "I don't know, but it wasn't a dog or someone wearing a cheap mask. The fence is about 10 feet high, so unless there's a giant behind it wearing a very elaborate Hollywood mask, I have no idea what this was. My backyard is very big. I'm not bragging when I say that. I say that to set the scene for this story. One evening, it was very quiet, and I was at home on my computer, relaxing and sipping coffee, which is one of my favorite things to do in the evening. That helps me relax a lot. It was almost the end of the day, and I needed to clear my head because I work from home and stare at a computer screen all day. So I love to go sit on my back porch, look into my backyard where there's a creek in the distance, and watch the sun go down. Not only is this easy on the eyes, but it also helps calm the mind. Taking a break from working on computers all day in my office. So I'm sitting outside sipping my coffee when I notice a dark shape at the edge of my field of vision. I could see something big and black moving in a straight line from the creek to my left. I see a big deer running very quickly, and not even a second later, I see the biggest dog I've ever seen chasing after it. But it looked very strange, like it was deformed. Have you ever seen a hyena? It kind of reminded me of a very large hyena because of its very arched back, but its four front arms were very big and its head was huge. It reminded me of how a lion's head looks like it's too big for its body, but it was definitely a dog. I've never seen such a big dog before, and it's chasing a deer that's running into the trees. It scared me for sure. I don't even know if that was a wolf or not, because I've never seen a wolf that big before. We got a cabin in Syracuse, New York, with my boyfriend. Well, it was in the woods about an hour outside of town. It was a cute little cabin that felt like home and was tucked away. At the time, my boyfriend worked a job that he hated, which was a night shift. I didn't get to see him much while I was working odd jobs to make ends meet. His boss was really taking advantage of him, and even though he had steady shifts, he hated the ships where he worked. It was on these ships that we would have a few experiences that would change our views on wildlife as a whole. When I pulled into our driveway one night after work, my headlights caught something right on the side of our house. It stopped moving as soon as the headlights hit it, and I was scared and shocked when I saw this thing. It was pretty muscular, and the chest looked like a person, just like the legs. We're also very muscular, and from the waist down, it looked a lot like a dog, right down to the hocks, but I couldn't really tell what the feet were. From the huge chest, I couldn't see any parts of the body. It had big biceps and triceps that went down to long forearms. It also had huge, oversized hands with big fingers and claws at the end, like a raccoon's but longer, if that makes sense. The head looked a bit like a wolf's, and there was a big mane around the neck. In the same way as a lion. Its eyes were bright yellow and looked like they were almost set into its skull. It just kind of stared at me in the headlights, shocked like I was. It stood there for a second, then turned its head and jumped into the dark. I just sat there in the car, stunned by what I had just seen. I didn't know how to think about the animal I had just seen. So I go home, where my boyfriend is just getting ready for work. I'm not sure if I should tell him, but I decided not to because I didn't want to ruin his night. So I tried to hide my feelings as best I could, but it turned out that he would see the same animal on his way home from work at 4 a.m. about a week later. I already said that his shifts changed all the time, and sometimes he had to leave at 3 or 4 in the morning. Sometimes he worked from midnight until 8 in the morning. His boss was a real you-know-what and loved to drag him around, but that's how bosses can be. When my boyfriend saw it, he was going outside to smoke a cigarette. Just as he was getting in the car and pulling out of the driveway, something jumped in front of the road and looked right at him. He was shocked, too, and put on the brakes so he wouldn't hit whatever it was. It looked at him, and he told me later that it sort of grimaced, then turned its head and jumped into the trees, not into the force, but up into the trees. This freaks him out so much that he speeds down the road and gets to work 20 minutes early. His boss thought he was so shaken up that he must have had a few Red Bulls. During his break, he called me and said, "Babe, you wouldn't believe what I saw this morning." So, I asked him, "So, what did you see?" He says it looked like a werewolf, but I have no idea what it was. So I just told him what I had seen, and he said, "Yeah, how did you know?" I told him I had seen the same thing last week on my way home from work, and we began to guess what kind of animal it was and if it lived in the area. Will we get eaten? So far, it doesn't seem to have done anything mean to us. So I'm going to assume that we were safe. Thankfully, we only saw it once more. The Wolfman won't show up again. From time to time, my job takes me to Kentucky. So, in 2016, I got a hotel room near Cookeville after my shift and stayed the night in Tennessee. It was about 1 in the morning, and Saturday would come the next day. It's not too early for me to check in. I didn't have any trouble falling asleep that night because I usually doze off while watching TV or on my phone. But around 3 or 4 in the morning, something woke me up. When I first woke up, I didn't know where I was or why. But then I heard someone or something banging on my door. It wasn't really loud, like someone was trying to break down the door with an axe and say, "Here's Johnny." It sounded more like someone with big claws or hands was repeatedly hitting the door with their palms to get my attention. I tried to remember where I was, but I had never rented a hotel before. It felt like I was in a strange trance for days. I felt compelled to get out of bed and go into the door, even though any normal, sane person would have seen all the red flags. But it felt like I was being pulled toward the door by some kind of force. That's the only way I can really explain it. As I got closer, I opened the door and took a few steps back. When I looked inside, there was nothing there, but the night outside still didn't have any crickets. No one spoke. I slowly stuck my head out of the hole. Nothing. I didn't see anything in either hallway. So, as I pulled my head back out and grabbed the door to slam it shut, I saw what looked like a big, upright wolf run by the door very quickly. If you think that's a crazy description, I can tell you it wasn't a man. It wasn't a joke. Whoever or whatever it was, it moved way too fast to be a person. I didn't hang around to try to figure out what it was. I felt like whatever transfer days I was in was broken. I got my clothes and laptop back quickly, jumped in my car, and drove away. I sat there for a while and tried to figure out what had just happened. After maybe an hour of sitting there on the road, I woke up in a daze and saw something run by my door. I was finally brave enough to go back to my hotel room. No one touched any of my things. The door wasn't just kicked in for no reason. I swear, this is exactly what went down. I don't know what was happening. I'm not sure if this was a real nightmare or just what happened. It gave me the creeps, though. In the spring of 2015, this was one of our favorite rivers. It was the same as any other day. We got up before dawn and put some snacks, food, cigarettes, and a bottle of water in a small backpack. We stopped quickly at the store to get some fresh food to use as bait. We got to the place where we usually fish at about 7:30 in the morning. As dawn was coming, the sky was just now getting brighter. Down an old gravel road, about 2 miles from where we park, is where we usually go fishing. This road goes deep into the woods until it ends at a bank river. It goes through much steeper terrain than you might think is possible. My brother takes off his pack and says he is going about 100 yards upriver. Here, you can cross the river without having to deal with the deep part. I tell him I'm going downriver to a small beach to hang out. On one of our trips before, we had found one. I get about halfway out and am fishing and just having a good time. And I see something in the middle of the trail about 100 yards away from me. At first, I think it's just my brother messing with me, but when I yell its name and no one answers, I'm terrified. I figured out that this wasn't my brother, but someone else. Did my brother do something wrong? Why is this person just looking at me? And that's when I noticed that it was moving, like wading back and forth. This was not a person at all. It was a big animal by Peter's side, and I froze right away. I was scared and couldn't say a word. It started to walk in this direction, but the way its legs moved back and forth made it look like it was moving by itself. I could feel panic spread through my whole body, and I could feel hate and evil from whatever was coming at me. I finally woke up from my fear-induced coma, or so it seemed, and turned toward where I thought my brother was. Then, it took a big step toward me and jumped about 30 feet. That was enough for me. I dropped my fishing line and ran back to where I knew the truck was. I could hear this thing on my trail coming up to me very quickly, sprinting towards us, and that's when I saw my brother already running away from this thing, whatever it was, because he was so scared by what he had seen. As we both run as fast as we can back to the truck, this thing is now picking up speed a lot. This thing stops, and we heard it jump into the river and disappear. We run all the way back to the truck, and when we get there, we are so tired and out of breath that we can barely breathe. I asked my brother, "So, what did you see? What the heck was that?" He kept moving his hands and shaking his head. We get in the truck, and as soon as he puts it in drive, the same animal jumps out of the trees and onto the bed of my brother's truck. It doesn't just jump onto the bed, though, it also jumps onto the rear left tire and bites it, ripping it and popping the whole thing. My brother floors in a car and acts like he's in a movie. This animal was thrown about 40 feet onto the gravel, and now my brother's truck is facing it head-on, so he slams on the gas and goes as fast as he can. My brother flies straight at this thing at 40 to 60 miles per hour. When the time is right, this thing jumps up, lands on the front of the truck, breaks a part of the windshield, and flies straight over. In the process of doing all this, my brother really messed up his axle and some of his tires, so he's flying out of this gravel road with this wolf thing running after us. His back tire is completely flat and his windshield is smashed, but not completely shattered. He's trying to get back to the main road as fast as he can, which is still a couple of miles away. This huge thing is now running right next to the driver's side, keeping up in speed and pace, and rams itself as hard as it can against the truck. It almost knocks the car off the road and into the trees. My brother is trying to stop it, so he turns the wheel sharply and tries to hit the wolf, but it jumps off into the trees. I was sure that this animal wanted to eat us and that we were going to die. So, we finally got to the end of the road without the thing falling off our truck. We had to pull over right away and call for help, even though we were very scared about what had just happened. What are we going to say to people? We did go off-roading, and things got a little crazy. Basically, that's what we had to tell the tow truck driver. We couldn't really explain it to them well. When the sheriff started asking us questions, he thought we had been drinking and hit a tree or something with the car. We weren't sure what to tell him, and I don't remember, but I think we told him something stupid, and we don't go back to that fishing spot anymore. We're done with that spot for good. When I was out during the day, I heard an odd howl. It was a long way away. At first, I didn't think much of it, but later, around 1:45 a.m. or so, my girlfriend and I were just relaxing in our bedroom. Our window is right next to our bed, so we can often see deer on our deck. At this point, we could hear heavy footsteps close to our cabin, as if whatever it was trying to look around and listen. I have never heard anything around our property before. So, of course, we were a little nervous. Just then, we see a big dog or wolf-like creature that is 7 to 8 feet tall running through our yard across the street from where the house came from earlier. It stopped about 30 to 40 feet from our cabin and just stood there in the middle of the road, staring at us for a minute. It was clear to me that this wasn't just any dog. Its limbs were very thin and long, and its body was very thin and almost looked like it wasn't getting enough food. It looked very dirty, and like its fur was all tangled up. After about a minute, the way it kept looking back at her bedroom window made me think it was trying to get my attention. However, whenever we tried to look directly at it, it would turn its head and look out into the forest. This went on for a while, until it seemed like the creature had lost interest in us as a whole. It then ran away towards a nearby bar. The way this thing was described was very similar to what I've heard from other people in the area who say they've seen a dog man. Even though I've heard these stories before, I didn't believe them until now. I'm very curious to find out if other people in my area have seen this thing too. My girlfriend and I are both carriers, so we spent the rest of the night with our guns locked and loaded in our beds. We were scared, but we were ready for whatever might happen. When we were younger, my brother and I used to spend a lot of time together in the backwoods. We both saw something when we were around 13 years old that we still can't explain. My brother and I were walking through the woods, not going anywhere in particular. Just walking. We finally reached a stretch of land that was a little bit more empty. It was almost completely flat, and there were only a few trees, which was very unusual in the forest where we grew up. As 13-year-old boys, we decided to use this to our advantage and made a makeshift battlefield to fight with sticks as swords. As we do this, we can hear something big start to move through the woods towards us. Before we could even ask what was going on, we heard branches breaking and loud footsteps. Something that looked like a big dog ran out of the woods and stopped about 10 feet away from where we were standing. It looked like a tall, thin dog with long, shaggy black hair and a white stripe on its chest that stood out even though it was dark. Its ears were pointy, and its eyes were big and round. We could see them very clearly from 10 feet away. Its nose and mouth looked like a dog's, but its teeth were thin and pointed like a shark's, and its face seemed to have a lot less hair on it. My brother and I were completely frozen with fear at the time, and we were ready to run if this thing decided to attack us or kill us. We didn't say a word, and just waited for something to happen. But this creature just looked at us with a blank face, as if it was trying to figure out what we were or if we were a threat. I think the fact that we were there surprised it. I remember that it looked and acted very surprised, as if it was on a mission to go somewhere and we had completely messed up that mission and now it didn't know what to do. So, after about a minute of this strange standoff, it just kind of turned around and walked out into the forest through another opening. After stopping right at the tree line, looking back at us one last time with a moment of hesitation, and then darting back the way it came, it was gone for good. After what had happened that morning, both my brother and I were on edge. We thought about doing some online research to see if there were any reports of something similar happening in our area. After looking for about an hour, we didn't find much. So, over time, it just became a memory from long ago and a fear that went away. I wasn't sure if other people in my hometown had ever seen something like this until I was almost back there for vacation. Maybe something happened that day that made it possible to see this thing. Or maybe that was the only time it got close to a human settlement. So I started looking again and eventually found an article about a local sighting here in Oklahoma, almost in the same spot where we saw this creature all those years ago. There were so many similarities between what my brother and I saw that day and what the other residents saw. They talked about something that looked like a wolf and a hyena mixed together. It was said to have dark fur with a white patch on its chest. It had pointed ears, thin, jagged black teeth, and an open mouth. It had orange eyes, long, thin legs and feet and hands like humans. The creature was also said to have a very human-like posture and way of moving, like the way its shoulders moved when it walked and the way it stood and moved. Since we saw this dog man, my brother and I have never seen another one like it. But with this new information and all the videos on your channel, it might be time to teach them a thing or two. How do you feel? Went on a trip with my wife to San Diego in 2008 and had a terrible time. We instead looked at the stars from a cliff in the Palomar Mountain State Park. I had just settled down and was laying on my back looking up at the stars for about 5 minutes before I saw something moving toward us from a distance. I thought it was a helicopter at first, but as it got closer and farther away, it didn't make any noise. As it got closer, it started to change shape. It went from looking like a helicopter to looking like a triangle, with a really dark bottom and 3 white lights on each corner. My wife and I were shocked because we had just seen a real UFO. It flew right over us, probably no more than a few hundred feet above, and headed towards San Diego. As soon as that happened, the atmosphere around us changed right away. I say that because it felt very strange right away, and now, 15 minutes later, we're still sitting there talking about it. How incredible it is that we just saw a UFO so close. We started to hear growling noises. The growling goes on for about 5 minutes. When my wife looks up, she sees a large dog with red eyes staring at us. I'll go straight to the good part, which we both know they won't waste any more time with. I don't know what that shape in the sky was, aliens, a UFO, or something else, but it brought bad luck with it. Something caught my eye in the woods. I just can't explain. I don't usually believe in hocus-pocus paranormal stuff, but this is so far out of left field for me. I still find it hard to really understand. I don't know what I saw, but what I saw has been going through my head ever since. I was camping in the woods 30 minutes from Grants Pass, Oregon, with a friend. We were drinking and smoking weed while sitting by the fire. On one side, where our tents were, we had a small fire pit where we would sit and talk. My friend got up to go drain the snake, so I sat there alone for a few minutes before I got up to stretch. They were a little bit squished. I sat there by myself and just thought about my life. So I got up and walked away from the camp, past where we had put our bikes up. It was so nice to be outside at night and see nothing but the stars and trees. I don't even know how it happened, but I saw something in front of me, and it was running on all fours the next second. I'm not sure how to say this or if I ever will be able to, but I've been thinking about it a lot since the stay. This. What I saw was a big dog, or maybe I should say a being that looked just like a wolf. It was on all fours, but its back was almost straight down. Its fur was light brown, and its eyes were very dark. Its mouth was wide open, and its tongue was sticking out like a big dog's. Only the fact that it wasn't running toward me or looking like it wanted to hurt me made me feel a little better. After it went away, there was no sound at all. I remembered that my rifle had a flashlight that could be attached to it. Even though I don't remember grabbing it, it's probably a good thing I did before it went away. After looking at me for a few seconds, it walked away behind some trees. I didn't feel like chasing it because I didn't know where it would go. Everything happened so quickly that if I had run away, it probably wouldn't have gone after me. Dogma and Sasquatch have never really interested me. I've never looked into this before, but it seems like a good idea. If you do, though, please let me know. I didn't even tell my friend, who went to the bathroom, what I had seen. I didn't think it was really worth it, and I've never told anyone else about it. I thought they would just say it was probably a dream, but after reading about what happens to dogs when things happen, I feel like this has happened for a reason. I'd love to hear what you think. When I was a kid, my grandmother would always tell me about this thing. She said it would always try to stand in the middle of the road and make these horrible screams. My dad swears up and down that he once saw one walk past our window. I know that they've been talked about all over the US. So it's not just something that happens in the Pacific Northwest. When I was young, my dad told me about a time when he saw one in the middle of the day. He said that his friend saw it as it walked through the forest. It just stopped in the middle of a step and stared at them until they felt so uneasy. They had to leave because this thing stood firm. I know it sounds crazy, but I did some research and found that people have actually gone crazy. I grew up in the small southern town of Tribby, Oregon. There was never anything there. Even though this strange-looking wolf thing did show up once in the late 1980s, many people thought it was a werewolf. Most people probably would have laughed at me if I told them the story, but my dad was very sure that it was true. It all began when he and his friends went to the forest just east of town for a weekend trip. They had spent the whole day trying to catch a bear or a deer, but they had no luck. When one of his friends saw something far away, they decided to pack up their gear and leave for the night. It was very tall, maybe 7 feet, and had thick black fur all over. It was walking upright like a man. My dad said that they had been watching it for a while before it saw them. It stopped, looked at them for a minute, and then shrank down, almost like it was pretending to be dead. Then he quickly stopped talking and ran across this field on all fours, about 125 yards away. My dad says that it moved so quickly that it was out of sight before his friend could get his rifle out. Now, my dad and his friends didn't talk much about this afterward. However, a few months later, when my uncle was alone in the woods, he came across a dog-like creature in the middle of a small creek or river bed. My uncle says it looked hurt, but when he went up to it out of curiosity, it turned out to be a trap. It stood up on its back legs and almost attacked him when it got close. My uncle got scared and ran away. We don't really know what he saw or what it could have been, but everyone gets very scared whenever we bring it up. Even my dad's high school friend swears he saw one in the middle of the highway when they were in high school. He says it was standing right in the middle of the lane, having yellow eyes that are sharp and shine in the headlights. He was coming around a corner on an old logging road at about 45 miles per hour when he saw it. He barely missed it by swerving and almost driving into a ditch. My dad didn't believe him until he and my uncle saw one a little while later, but as I've gotten older, I've become more interested in cryptids and the supernatural. From what I can tell, I try to learn a lot and really study and learn about Dogman. People have been talking about them a lot, probably more than you know, and I know they're not from America. In fact, they have been seen in the UK, France, Germany, Russia, and even South America. So, if you think you're all alone in the woods at night, you're wrong.